Hello, everybody. Hope you enjoyed your lunch, and I hope you've been enjoying your day so far. We've got a panel session for you now, mix it up a little bit. The title of this panel is The End of the Beginning, What Next for Football Analytics? And not, as when I originally emailed all the panelists, the beginning of the end, what next for football analytics? They were all too polite to tell me that that probably wasn't the best way to introduce them. So I'll introduce the guys and then ask them some questions and we'll get going. So from closest to further away, Javier Fernandez, former head of analytics at Barcelona, now senior data science at Zealous Analytics. He's one of the leading guys in this space. You'll have probably seen him at different events, and he's one of the most well-known proponents of AI and machine learning in football. So looking forward to hearing from Javi. Rory is the chief soccer correspondent for the New York Times. He is author and ghostwriter of a number of books, including Expected Goals. There you go, Rory. I actually had to pay for that. So, yeah, available from all good bookshops, apparently. So it's a book on the sports data industry. I've read it. It's very good. It features a number of you who are already sat there, so that's good. He's a regular guest on media outlets such as BBC 5 Live and podcasts like Totally Football Show. And I noticed that in a recent appearance on the Football Clichés podcast, Roy described himself as a football romantic. So I think he's in the wrong place, and you can boo and throw things. I didn't mean it, God. Sarah probably needs no introduction to those of you in the room, not least because she's already done a talk today, but mostly because she's one of the pioneers of this industry. We have a research room upstairs going on all day. Most of the stuff in there probably wouldn't have happened if it hadn't been for Sarah and the work she's done. So delighted to have Sarah here. So there's the introduction. Happy with those? All right? Yeah, good. Sarah, let's start with you. I'm defining this as now as the end of the first era of football analytics. What would you say, how would you say we've done? What would the report card read like?
Well, I think, one thing that I've been thinking about a lot lately is, it's been 10 years since I've been in this industry, which is kind of a long time, but kind of a not. And so the types of conversations that we're having now are very different from what it was 10 years ago. Nobody has to, I think the phrase I heard today is, validate their existence. People understand that there's value in applying data to decisions in football. So we're able to have a very different type of conversation. It's no longer, is this a good idea or not? It's how can we get better? How can we learn things? So, I think we've come a long way in 10 years, but we're just very early on that pathway.
Would you agree with that, Javi?
Yeah, definitely. I think that when I think about the current state of analytics, probably see it as probably it's like a teenager now, in a sense that it some days feels like a grown-up and some other days feels like a kid. And I see it in a sense that in some places we are being mature enough to actually provide value, but in general I also see that there's a lot of immaturity as a field that is pretty clear now, and it definitely marks the next stage of what we probably should be doing. So I think there's at least two main things of focus when you think about trying to provide value through analytics. And one thing is more obvious, and it's where we have been focusing more, that is technological developments, having the right models, trying to capture things that matter. We have already captured interesting things, but probably there's a long step ahead to understand the game better and capture that knowledge. I was speaking with Jesse Davis some minutes ago, and I was asking him hey, don't you think that research quality has dropped a little bit in soccer these years? And I think he says something that is pretty clear, that is that low-hanging fruits are all gone now. So we need, next step is solving the real problems. And just to add one more thing, that I think is where we are more immature now, but for a good sense, in a sense that looking for improving, is in the processes of driving value in practice. So adoption of analytics, I think, is not there yet. So you see the different clubs, but it's not yet something that is 100% part of the culture of clubs and the way things are being managed. It's just entering slowly and having some impact, but not that huge impact that we probably imagined some years ago, I think so.
Okay, thank you. Rory, you obviously spoke to dozens of people for the book, available in all good bookshops. What were people's views on where the industry has got to? Was there a consensus, or was it a bit mixed?
It's difficult as an outsider to come in and say this is how it is. My sense was kind of dual. One was something Sarah said to me, which was that she looked at what they could have done at Arsenal, and it was hard not to feel as though there was missed opportunity, which I think is a little bit harsh on yourself, to be honest. I think that's slightly negative. And the other was the sense that I think because everyone's so conscious of how far there is to go and up the kind of world of possibility that's out there, that sometimes it's hard to see how far things have come. And the one that sticks with me is that in 2000, football didn't really have the concept of the assist. They didn't measure it. I presume they knew that people set up goals, but no one was thinking to count those things. And now if you look at all those low-hanging fruit, like Javi says, they are all gone. And the speed of that transformation is actually quite remarkable. So yeah, it must, to people who really know this field, feel like there is so much more to do, that it is still nascent, that it is still young. But you think about the ground that you've covered, it's quite impressive.
Yeah, one thing from my experience is that I've noticed from marketing sports data for a decade plus is that originally it was a persuasion job. You'd have to persuade people it was even a thing and they even wanted to use it, and the competitors that you were marketing against was largely sort of non-usage. And now it's more of a brand switching job, persuading people which data set is the best and that kind of thing. It's StatsBomb, if you didn't know. Just going back to my experience on this, one of the trends has been tension over the years that I've been doing this. So it's been tension either between data suppliers in the industry, within a club, between the kind of data community and an industry kind of seemingly reluctant to adopt, or between the media and fans. That tension seems to have softened now. But there's definitely still a tension, I think, between whether analytics can deliver at the same kind of timescales results that people in football work at. People in football work to very short timescales. Analytics tends to work to very long timescales. Am I right in that kind of assumption, or do you think that tension will ever be broken, Javi?
Yeah, I wouldn't see it as tension in the sense of any kind of struggle or fight, but it's definitely like a new way of supporting decision making that is pouring into an industry that is 100 and something years old. So it's definitely not easy to try to come up with a different way of solving those problems. But I do think we have a lot of advantages in the sense that, football being a late bloomer, football analytics for that sense, took a lot of advantage from the prior experience in basketball, in baseball, in other sports, because I do think we have a pretty healthy and interesting community from that sense. So I think there's way more support and way more people doing these kind of things, which eases the way to find solutions to problems that actually matter, right? So something that is probably happening is that we are starting to see more people working in clubs, lower amount of public research, a lot of everyone doing very similar models, but my model is better than that model. And that fight, I don't think is that healthy in that sense, but it's natural. I think as long as we get closer to solve the issues that coaches, not only coaches, like anyone in the organization, because there's different kind of problems. As we get closer to actually find applicable solutions to those problems, that appearing tension will disappear a little bit. But since we are still, from my perspective, in an adoption phase, that tension I see in just as immaturity in that sense. We're not 100% sure how to communicate effectively, fast, and obviously, or not in every place, right?
Sarah, from your experience at Arsenal, does that tension exist? Did that tension exist? Are we any closer to kind of solving that one?
Yeah, I think one of the big tensions is, you want to use analytics to help reduce error in the types of decisions that you're making, but there's more and more pressure to make decisions as quickly as possible. So you want to buy players as young as possible before any of the competitors come in and kind of drive up their price. So there's this tension and trade-off between having certainty in what the data is saying and then trying to make a decision on a player that's maybe played like 3 times. So I don't think there's a good solution to that tension. I think it's a healthy tension. But I think that's one of the big problems that we're dealing with.
Kind of moving on from that point, but slightly related, do you think there's anything around the changing style of football that can be attributed to the era of analytics that we've been through? Has there been anything like the change in 3-point shooting and 2-point shooting in basketball, for example? Javi, what do you think? Also, does it matter?
Yeah, that second part of the question probably is interesting. I think there's, of course, a nicer story if we can say we won that match with that information we knew and we scored that goal. Could happen in some cases, but I think that we all start realizing pretty quickly that, and I saw a lot of talks about culture and the things I found like Tom's presentation amazing in that sense, that was really portraying what I think is next step and next stages. So we are realizing that it is the sum of these marginal gains that is making that overall change. So creating that culture, making the organization a bit more aware of using more objective information for making decisions is going to help the kind of questions you're asking, the kind of things you can actually do, the way you see the game. But I don't see it as, I don't think it's going to be as easy, having such a wide field and 22 players and playing with your feet and being so hard to score goals, to have this single thing that you will say is changing the game. So it's more interesting this way, but it's more boring as well, because it's not like that great story you're going to see the headline.
There's kind of 2 things that I think seem to have some sort of data influence. One is the demise of long shots, which is a pattern that's been going on for like 10 years. And the other is the fact that teams cross in different ways. But the problem is that football works on loads of different levels with lots of different inspirations and influences. So Pep Guardiola teams at Barcelona probably weren't shooting from range because Pep wanted them to keep the ball and to get as close as possible. So is that what's driven that? We know that that's how kind of ideas spread from visionary super coaches onto everybody else. The chances of that not being at least influenced by the data, I think, is pretty minimal, but it's not going to be as easy to say as it is in the NBA. Like, until this point, everyone shot in this area, and then there was a big change, and now literally everybody shoots in either this area or that area. It's not as clean cut, but the chances are that data has had an influence. It's even harder to tell because clubs don't really want to talk about it. It might be that there's teams here who are doing one specific thing on the pitch that is purely data-driven, but they are not going to tell anybody about it because it's absolutely not in their interests. And that makes it hard to know from the outside how fast and far the progress has been.
Do you think analytics would have had an easier ride if we'd been able to pin one particular change in playing style to the rise in data use?
As long as it wasn't long ball, yes. If there was something you could trace to data, if someone, coach came out and said, this is a data insight, we're going to do this now, we're going to flip over when we take throw-ins, because that's how you score goals, and that then led to a trophy, then that's your Moneyball moment, because it works. But in the absence of that, you have to assume, as Javi says, it's marginal gains, it's one weapon in an arsenal.
I was at the Middlesbrough v Newcastle game where Steve Watson did his flip throw, by the way. One thing you mentioned there was about teams keeping sort of the real good stuff to themselves, right? Having a bit of a black box. And that's been a trope that I've seen a lot. Sarah, do you think that's something that has definitely happened, or is it just something that people believe? Do you think that if it has happened, will it continue? And will it just lead to the teams who are really good at this stuff getting better, or will the kind of smaller guys catch up?
Yeah, this is something I think that's changed quite a bit over the years. So I think clubs used to have a huge advantage over what was happening in the public space, mostly because they had, a number of people working full-time on these projects. So they're able to just make advances at such a higher speed than the public was able to, and they also have access to, incredible football minds in the analysis department and then in the coaching staff that a lot of the people in the public don't have access to, so they're able to, get a deeper understanding of the game much more quickly. But I think what we're kind of seeing now is that a lot of times these departments become victims of their own success, and so as there's more and more uptake and adoption, you kind of get bogged down with the day-to-day grind of supporting a coaching staff during a season, and that can take up a lot of time. So that, I think, is somewhat slowing down progress within clubs. Meanwhile, the public sphere is able to build on all of the knowledge that's been going on for years now, and so it's not people continuously trying to improve XG models. They're kind of finding niches where they can really do kind of interesting work and push things on. And, we still have, I think, in global football, like a couple clubs that have a long history of a data culture, but most of the clubs are kind of, at best 1 or 2 data scientists pretty early on in their kind of journey through building a data culture within a sporting organization.
Yeah, Javi mentioned marginal gains and low-hanging fruit. Are they more for the teams that haven't really got on board with this stuff yet, or are kind of late to the journey? Is that where the next big load of gains are going to be made? Is it just iterative for the guys at the top now?
Yeah, I think that referring to that thing of role of departments within the teams and the community, different sources where research, information, and applied science, it's going on. Just a few ideas there. Like the first one is, football clubs are not technological companies, and that's a reality that probably I don't have like experience in other industries, but probably it's really difficult to an industry that is pretty expert at doing something to be expert in different other industries, right? So I think it's going to be an interesting time where or like clubs can realize that if you have scientific-driven people inside the club, those can become experts at understanding what is important, what to do, what people I have inside, because incredibly still at clubs, the impact of analytics is incredibly dependent on few people that is in the organization. Those people change and the impact changes. Those people could be coaches, sporting director, whoever who's driving that kind of thing. And this is like a thin a line that can break pretty quickly. So if you're aiming to be like a super innovative tech company within a club and you are a 5-people team at the same time, you have to be applied and communicate and to understand the game and watch. It's impossible. So I think there's like very interesting opportunity, like for next stage for clubs to be smarter at collaborating with anyone else willing to invest that time and to develop those next things, right? Those could be companies, could be especially universities, could be like a lot of people that is willing to invest time at doing that. And people at clubs, I think, can have an incredible role at, understanding in a more fine-grained way what questions could be important, what others cannot be solved. But if we work as silos and completely isolated, some teams are going to have some advantage, but I don't think we're going to grow a lot as a field. So
it'll be interesting to hear from Sam Gregory later about building an analytics department from scratch in an MLS team. Does football know what a perfect analytics department looks like? Sarah?
For sure, you definitely need a data engineer or two. I think that's one of the next big areas that teams need to think about is, you're under such time constraints. How can you make sure that you're processing data in a timely fashion, in an accurate fashion, in a scalable fashion? So you need really smart people who are building infrastructure to enable other really smart people to build things on top of it. And then I think you probably need, a couple data scientists to build some models, but I think the really key thing here is to have a couple people in that department that really understand football and really understand data, understand the limitations of data, understand, all the biases in decision-making processes, and are just able to kind of navigate how to use this information in a smart, sensible way, and communicate this to people. So, one thing that I think has changed over the last 10 years is data literacy of people within football clubs has really improved, and it's great. So you need somebody who can kind of take it to the next level and really push it and say, this is how we're going to use it all across the club, make really smart decisions.
Rory, speaking about data literacy, would you ever imagine hiring somebody for the New York Times or The Athletic, a football journalist who didn't know their way around a XG race chart or whatever it may be?
Yes. If you're best mates with George Mendes, you're getting a job. If you can write Pulitzer Prize winning stuff, you're getting a job. It's something useful, it's part of your arsenal, it's helpful if you can understand data. I think it's probably obstructive if you are deeply resistant to the idea that data can be applied to sport. I think that would limit you as a sports writer. But at the same time, there's lots and lots of things. The glory of football is like, there's different ways to interact with it. There's different aspects that appeal to different people. So you can be really interested in the way that football intersects with society and watch it for that and not really care about the performance levels or the players or the transfers or whatever it might be. Like, you can just love it as a soap opera. There's lots of different ways to engage with football. So there's lots of different ways to tell football's story. But I think from a media perspective, you probably wouldn't get anybody who was like, no, I don't think data works. Don't be ridiculous. I think that feels quite an old-fashioned perspective. It's probably generational as well. That, I mean, I'm 40, and I grew up probably the first generation of Football Manager and FIFA and all that stuff. And people who are younger than me, that are totally native to that world. So the idea that these things can be expressed through numbers is just familiar in a way that it wasn't to like people who were journalists in the 1980s and stuff. That they are too old. They are not of that world. So I think you wouldn't get anybody who's totally objects to it, but you don't have to include it in every story. A lot of stories aren't about what happens on the pitch. You know, ultimately transfer stories do better than anything else, and the last thing you want in a transfer story is actual facts. That would ruin the fun for everybody.
Yeah, I was just trying to find out why Warville was hounded out of The Athletic, really. So kind of building on that, it was a big moment for a lot of people in this room, some of my old colleagues, especially when XG was used on Match of the Day for a start. I remember being very excited about it and my wife not really caring about what I was talking about. Is there a next big breakthrough metric? Is that going to be a thing? Rory, we'll go you first.
Well, Jamie Carragher kind of had a thing, like an affair with PPDA, didn't he, for a bit? And he was really pushing it on the British public. And I think that struggled. I'm not in a position to describe how good a metric it is, but I think that struggles because you can't explain it in a sentence. Whereas XG has cut through because you can explain it in a sentence, even if you get a sentence in response, which is the only statistic that matters is goals and shots. You think, same thing. It needs to be simple. It needs to be something that is intuitive to fans. Because XG ultimately, no matter how resistant people are and how flawed the models are, XG is every fan understands the idea behind it, because after a game you always say, well, we should have won that. So it makes sense. I think anything that's more complex than that, fans maybe don't particularly have the energy to try and understand, but crucially broadcasters don't have the time to explain. If you have a metric that you have to explain for 2 minutes, that's bad TV, so you're not going to do it. And that was the problem with PPDA, that you kind of get carried explaining stuff. That's not what you want from your Sunday afternoon football match.
Sort of building on that, sometimes when I go on Twitter and I look at analytics takes, they make me want to chew my own arm off. And I'm not like a hardcore data guy. I'm kind of a few rungs down the pyramid there. But do the presence of people doing analytics badly make people like your job, Sarah, your job, Javi, does it make your jobs harder to sell analytics in, to talk about it well? Or is there just a big dividing line between kind of public-facing nonsense and then the type of stuff that you talk about?
Yeah, I think analytics done poorly can actually be really damaging to the entire industry. So, I spent the last 10 years working in England, where we were able to build a really good data culture within Arsenal. So, people kind of knew what was going on, and if they heard, a poor analytics take, they had the tools to kind of process how they were analyzing that, be skeptical about it, or come to us and ask questions about it. I then spent the summer working in Spain, which is a really different context, probably not as far along the analytics journey as England or the United States is. And, you're talking to people who had been kind of curious and optimistic about analytics, but then their first experience is like really bad, where they're just getting a list of players with no context, no understanding about style of play or league competition. And so, they come to me and they say, well, sometimes the data agrees with me, sometimes it doesn't. Who knows? Nobody can predict the future. And so you realize that nobody ever really sat down with them and kind of walked them through how these things work, how they become part of the process. And so they were really resistant because they had wanted to incorporate it and then just got stuff that didn't really make sense to them. So I thought that was pretty damaging.
Javi?
Yeah, I do think that a big part of that culture thing that it's really difficult to explain because it's a bit vague, but it does make sense, is that that still the data analyst or anything related to data science in football is not well understood within people that is actually taking that into practice. Say sporting director, coaches, player, doesn't matter. So I think that immaturity what leaves is that any data scientist or any data analysis is the same thing. It's just packed in the same box. It's like I'm a computer scientist. It's like when they say oh, you're a computer scientist, can you fix my printer, right? Just yeah, but I should be able to do so, but it's not understanding what's the specificity of that role, right? So I do think that right now probably if a club hires a physical coach and he starts doing things, and after 5 days, if he's a bad one, or doesn't have enough knowledge, it's going to be pretty obvious for the rest of the club. There's going to be a lot of shiny signals saying oh, this is not right, or this is old-fashioned. Not the case for analytics now. So if you say sporting director X might say oh, I saw in this newspaper this data thing, and you tell me this data stuff, and data's that, and data there. Everything's data and everything's valid. It's just showing that we haven't yet really chewed completely or understood how this could work and where good analysis is and what bad analysis is. At the same time, we should, as a community, again, make an effort on try to hide things less and be more open to acknowledge that we don't know how some models work and that some things need to be explained more easily. And thinking about that question on what's the next metric that's going to show in TV, I think that probably you will think some sort of value attribution of players' actions other than scoring. That's going to be impossible to explain in the short term, but probably there are other simpler, more understandable metrics that are correlated with that. Touches in the last third or passes into the box or whatever thing that are easier to understand and enough to explain the concept without getting into those details. So if people are serious professionals are believing on bad analytics, part of that is our fault of not yet knowing how to make the difference.
Yeah, that tells us something Sarah said on a podcast I was listening to actually, where you said that you've spent a fair bit of your time trying to minimize how much you speak about data and talk more in footballing concepts. Is that going to be a key trend and a key skill set for the people kind of following you in your career?
I think so. Early on, a lot of the analytics talk was about, you need a translator, somebody who can speak data and then speak football. And I think it's not really translation, it's just finding a common language to talk about. And so, in my talk, I highlighted the FIFA football language. I think that's a really powerful concept. But, one way to get adoption is to kind of show, these are what the numbers are, this is what the model's saying, and here's how it is on the pitch. That's the easiest way to get people to trust you, is saying, watch this video, see with your eyes, see the numbers, this is how everything's working. So I think, for me, that's something really key and crucial in terms of being successful in an applied environment. And a few years ago, I got to hear a woman named Amanda Cox speak. So if people know her, she was a former New York Times, data visualization editor, brilliant person. So her talk was all about lean in wow, not lean back wow. So in order to get people to engage with your work, you want them to lean in and say like, wow, this is really interesting. I want to learn more about it. You don't want them to lean back and say, wow, like this is over my head. This is really cool, but I don't understand it. So I think, again, talking in that common language, you're not trying to show them how smart you are. You're trying to show them how useful you are.
Yeah, it's interesting. I noticed research of this panel that in 2015, friend of the show, Brian Prestige, said he was asked what was holding analytics back. And his answer was that analytical culture talk is holding it back, and skill sets within clubs are the things that needed to change. Are we even in 2015's version of the future yet, have we? Do you think the skill sets in clubs have changed? Do you think the analytical culture talk has changed?
Yeah, I think that it's in the common talk, it's clear observation that younger coaches or football practitioners are more, not only data aware, but are like more curious about certain technological innovations or receiving information from other places. Definitely that's the case for players in the sense that are typically young people more used to the current practices and probably love to see quick summaries of things that are of value about them. So I think that's a change that is probably going to be natural with the change of times in that sense, that it's not going to be that rare. So I don't know exactly what are the timelines, but it was something like 25 years ago, see a doctor in a coaching staff was impossible. Like doctors don't belong here now. It's a common thing, not in the coaching staff per se, but same thing happened with physical coaches. Say I think it's 15 years ago, it was impossible to see a physical coach around that, and now it's part of that. So next step was game analysts or video analysts that are there. If you see like a team's picture, like photo, like year season photo, you will see how those roles start being incorporated there. I think I haven't seen the first season photo of a team with a data analyst, but will happen, right? So I think those kind of roles are going to probably just pour in more slowly, not only that role, but that culture of having a broader skill set. And the final thing is something that should change, and I think it's going to change either slowly or by force, is lots of roles in a football club tends to be grabbing this thing I know how to do and defending. I'm the right person to do that. There's a lot of technical manual work, but they're incredibly good at understanding the game. But that's harder to sell, right? So I'm an incredibly fast coder in sports code. It's great, tagger, right? But I understand the game well. It's harder to sell, but it could be more true. So what I would like to see in that change of mindset is seeing more and more coaches devoted to coaching and understanding the game and creating questions and doing those things, and less manual work, recovering GPS, putting in cones and doing things, and more thinking about, or even talking with the players or even playing with the players, right? So, but that's, I think, is going to happen naturally.
Kind of connected to that, I was reading an article you wrote in 2015 in the set pieces, and you said 2020 you will think that 2015 you is an idiot. Does 2022 you think that 2015 you is an idiot? Do you understand football more now than you did, and has data helped you with that?
2022 me thinks all previous forms of me is an idiot, and 2024 me will hate 2022 me. It's the nature of human growth. No, I think you do. Like, there's lots of different ways to understand football, and maybe I think this is a fan's perspective rather than a journalist's perspective, but you see more things, you learn more things, you kind of become intrigued by more aspects, and the way that you kind of envision the game changes. So to name drop horribly, I went to see Monchi in like 2019, expecting him to talk me to like the whole like Monchi's phone thing, and Monchi's always on his phone, and he's constantly like everyone texts him all the time, and he's amazing, and he goes to Brazil and he finds Dani Alves, and he's this genius. But Monchi was like, well, the big thing that we do is actually done by my mate, Emilio, who does all the due diligence on the players' personalities. And what they know is that Seville is a very hot, very pretty, but quite close city. Like, it's not the bright lights of London or Paris or Milan. So what they need is the type of person who can live happily in Seville. And there'll be people in this room who will tell me that you can do that on a data basis, that there will be kind of a way of analysing personality types that will settle well in your location. I think Michelin might have tried it to do some sort of research projects into, okay, what type of player, what type of person does well here? And that may well be another frontier for data to look at, the psychological side of the game. It feels like maybe sports science keeps on going, but that's pretty advanced. It's hard to imagine that no one's going to take no one's taking like a second off the 100-meter record. Do you know what I mean? Humans aren't suddenly going to get loads quicker. Maybe analytics is continuing to kind of pick the low-hanging fruit and has to discover what's on the higher branches. Maybe psychologically we're not looking at football enough. Maybe that's the next kind of thing that people will try and push the boundaries of, because there are all these different factors. But until Monchi told me that, it never occurred to me that the crucial thing in a transfer is not even just is the player happy, but is the player's wife happy? Are the player's kids happy? Have they settled in? Do they like the weather? Like the thing that Angel Di Maria's wife said about people in Manchester being weird. Like, we all laugh, isn't it? Isn't it funny that this sort of Argentinian model hated Manchester? That's really important. If your wife's unhappy, if your partner's unhappy, you are not going to perform at work. And there is a human side to it that certainly journalists overlook, and I think fans in general overlook. So yeah, you do continue to learn, and sort of understanding data-led concepts is part of that, because there are insights to glean into the game.
Data can't measure heart, is that what you're saying? Can't measure passion.
Data can't measure how much your partner hates a place.
Fair enough. I've been around sports data for 15, 16 years, and I still shout shoot when Johnny Howson's 35 yards out. So, some of us will never learn.
But sometimes that's the right decision. Sometimes the opposition has.
It never is.
It's Johnny Howson. Johnny Howson's a hero to the people of Yorkshire, so we're not going to criticise Johnny Howson. But sometimes the counterintuitive thing is the right decision, right? So, and there are lots of things that appeal to us about football, and one of those things tends to be the rare occasion that a player who is otherwise quite useless smashes one into the top corner. So Johnny Howson should keep trying.
I'll let him know. Sarah and Javi, you guys who work with the data every day, do we need more data from the biggest competitions? Is it about depth of data and different types of data? Or do you just need the data that we have now from a wider breadth of competitions, youth competitions? If I could snap your fingers and have one of those two, which would you choose? Sarah?
I would probably go with depth. And so one thing, leaving StatDNA, leaving Arsenal, that I really miss is historical data. StatDNA was doing incredible things back in 2010, 2011. So we were able to learn a lot of things around, player trajectories, aging curves, youth development. That doesn't exist outside of that context for a lot of people, because, a company like StatsBomb is not that old. So, I think there's a lot of questions that you can't really begin to start answering unless you have like a really long data set.
Javi?
Yeah, I guess that if you ask us if we want more data, we only have one answer, right? Let's never know. But yeah, I do think that something we're definitely lacking could be interesting is have more public data of quality, because now it's basically practically impossible to validate two approaches with the same benchmark, right? You just kind of do it. So you have to believe that, and that pours into the culture of believing different sources, and anyone can use any kind of thing. So that's a very difficult battle, because of course data costs money, and probably you're not even allowed to publish that. But I do think it's an important thing. If you see like other areas, fields are evolving pretty quickly, and thinking about AI, I think computer vision, natural language processing, and whatever is going to drive what self-driving cars are going to do, they're pretty well-established benchmarks to do things. They're not incredibly great, but there's a way of validating that. So data-wise, I think that it will be important to have that kind of source of validation. And the second thing is, I totally agree with this historic thing. It's incredibly important to be able to understand if our metrics are stable in time, how to understand player development. It does matter a lot having the data from the same player. Like characterizing players and saying, oh, a similar player had this thing, it's not the same as actually looking at that player for a long time. But I'm unaware of how viable is that business-wise, right? I know that there's an associated cost with having more leagues, more seasons, and more whatever, and it's definitely a costly thing. So, yeah.
It's interesting that you mentioned the free data releases, because as part of this research, I was looking back on the MCFC Analytics project, which I know was kind of instrumental in some of your early stuff, Sarah, the free data release. I looked at the very first blog to cover it, and they described it as a disappointingly basic data set that is simply not good enough. So you can't please anybody, really, can you? I don't know who that was. We've only got a minute left. I'm getting wrapped up. So come to you, Sarah, for the final thing. There was a Bleacher Report article that said, if anyone is primed to crack football's statistical secret, it's StatDNA. So is there something you want to tell us?
No comment.
Okay, guys, if you put your hands together for the panel, I hope you found that as interesting as I did.